Hello and welcome to What a Day. This is the very first video that I'm making. Today is the 17th of August 2022, and for those of you who have just started to watch this and have no idea what's going on in terms of what is What a Day, what a week, what a month, I will link a video in the description box to explain to you what exactly are these programs that we are running to try and holistically cover current affairs for civil services. For those of you who are at an advanced stage and only require an audio note and a short list, you'll find them on the Telegram channel. Now, whichever newspaper you read, we'll start with the Hindu first and then we'll move to the Indian Express, except for possibly one piece of information. The Hindu and the Indian Express on the 17th of August cover more or less the same sort of issues. So let's begin. This is not a substitute for you reading the paper. You are now going to read the paper with me. This is the shortlist for Hindu. Please take out your Hindu newspapers, keep them in front of you when you are going through the video. Now, right on the first page, you will see a news item that says Chinese tracking vessel reaches Sri Lanka port. India and the US had objected to the presence of Yongwang 5. Now, as a civil services aspirant, what is this and why is this important, and to what extent is this important? So basically what has happened is Sri Lanka took a ton of debt from China. Hambantota port was developed. There are arguments that Sri Lanka did not even need it because the Colombo port was fairly close by, and you also have other ports. Of course, because of Sri Lanka's ongoing economic crisis, Sri Lanka can't pay back China. So therefore China says, you know what, you can't pay me back, so I'm going to do whatever I can in the port that sort of I have paid for. Now, China has sent a ship which China says is a research or an environmental preservation practices ship to figure out what's happening in the marine areas around. India and the US look at it from a point of suspicion. We think it is a surveillance vessel to keep a check on what we are doing and to sort of get insights from an intelligence point of view. Fantastic. Now the question is, what and how does it become important? In a larger question on Indo-Sri Lanka relations, this becomes a context because Sri Lanka agreed to China docking their ship, despite the fact that India has been helping out Sri Lanka economically, militarily, and otherwise, not just recently but since time immemorial. It also becomes a another conflict point between India and China, because China is trying to sort of place its presence in the region through this, the whole string of pearls, ring of fire story. So do we need to go through this in detail? No. In a larger question on Indo-China or Indo-Sri Lanka, in the introduction, you could possibly use this as a context point, nothing else. So what do? You read the article once and then you forget about it. And whenever you are studying Indo-China or Indo-Sri Lanka, just add this in the context. That is it. That's all that you have to do and nothing else. Now, the second piece of information that you see, so this therefore becomes important. The second major headline that you see is 31 ministers inducted into the Nitish-led Bihar cabinet. Absolutely irrelevant. Let me tell you why. Political change of power happens very, very often. It is almost circumstantial in nature. You are not going to be asked any questions from here. You are not going to be asked the analysis from a political standpoint here. So don't worry about it. Then the third heading which you see is called FIFA suspends India center approaches the Supreme Court, right? This one. Hold on. Read the article. It also continues on page number 12 also, from what I understand, and page number 17 also. So, first things first. Do I need to know the composition, the details, and the HQ of FIFA? No. Do I need to know anything about the All India Football Federation in terms of what the problems are, how do they function? No. What does this piece of information tell you? So basically, number one, the Supreme Court set up a committee which supersedes the regulation of football from the All India Football Federation, which is an independent body which governs football in the country. Like how BCCI, which is a private body which governs cricket in the country, and of course is a grey area as to whether it is a state or not. Because of this, FIFA gets upset because FIFA says we are independent and autonomous, so all of the national football agencies should also be independent and autonomous, so we are suspending India. Now this becomes a problem because India was supposed to host an under-19 Women's World Cup this year in October. So this is the context. Parallelly, the Delhi High Court has also appointed a committee which is now going to perform the functions and has taken away the functions from the Indian Olympic Association. So the larger issue is sports regulation in India. Are we regulating sports the right way? Should the government singularly have a government regulator? Should we have a PPP model of regulators? Should we have a completely private model of regulators, but there are certain guidelines which are issued by the government? So if you actually hold on to your horses for a few days, you will see that in the next coming days or so, in some form or another, you will find an editorial or an article which talks about sports regulation in the country. That becomes important. So, do I need to get into unnecessary detail over this? Not really. Another point that sort of comes in here is when the Supreme Court is appointing a committee to oversee the functions and to sort of then have powers to regulate football, is this judicial review or is it judicial activism or is it judicial overreach or adventurism? So you can use this as an example on the role of the judiciary across these three parameters. Just this, the fact that the court has appointed a committee to take over the functions of the Indian Olympic Association effectively is a sort of a transgression of judicial review. So that is the utility of it. But beyond this, don't spend too much time. Neither in the pre or the mains as such you're going to be asked a question. Because in the mains, a few years ago, there was a question on sports regulation where they asked a question wherein should sports persons in India be given support right from their childhood, or should they only be given a reward once they've won something in the form of a medal or anything for the country? So you will often see larger policy based questions which are asked from tangential sectors. So a larger analysis of sports policy in India becomes important. Now very interestingly, this is where things become important. The timing of this news. For those who are preparing for the mains this year, this is not going to be asked. The cutoff is already done. Newspapers don't have to be read. For the people who are appearing for the mains this year. For those of you who are preparing for next year, this is too early for a governance question to be asked from here. And you will not have a prelims question from here. Because usually governance questions that are asked in the mains, and this leads only to a governance question, it doesn't fit anywhere else in the syllabus, is the last 6 to 8 months. Now, unless nothing major happens over the next 1 year, which is highly unlikely, then by elimination this becomes important. So you don't have to particularly spend a lot of time on sports regulation right now. If an editorial or an article comes, We will get into it when we get into it. Then there is another piece of information wherein Kashmiri Pandit was shot dead by militants. As unfortunate as this is, this could be used as context in internal security and the law and order situation in the country, but you don't really need to read anything more beyond this. Now, another piece of information which has been dealt in a lot of depth is the Bilkis case. Now, in the context of the Gujarat riots of 2002, as you would know, a lady called Bilkis was gang raped by about 11 people while she was pregnant. Now, this sounds too inhuman to even think or describe. So, of course, a lot of these were these people who were charged were convicted of life imprisonment. Now, when we say conviction, it means that the court has found you guilty and has sentenced you to punishment. Now, the court has already given a judgment on this, and this judgment happened long time ago. Now, the issue is not about this. This particular case is not important. But the problem is, the Gujarat state government has released these convicts, saying that the central government has a policy which says that for those people who have finished half of their sentences should be released from jail so that they can become productive members of society, and it also tries to solve the overcrowding of jails problem. Now, this is technically an act of remission. Remission means you're shortening somebody's sentences. So in India, once a court has given you a sentence, then who can shorten that sentence? The president and the governor can, respectively. So can the union and the state governments. So the larger issue is, was this justified under the remission policy? Because the state government has to confer with the central government, which basically means that both of them have to agree on this. But now hold on and think, as a UPSC aspirant, do I need to know the technicalities of the execution of the remission policy? No. In a larger answer on the criminal justice system, one of your points is going to be overcrowding of jails, and one of the solutions is going to be remission, but with the exception of heinous crimes. Because this also is not just a criminal justice system or a governance issue, it is also an ethical issue, in the sense that what if somebody has committed 50 murders, has been sentenced to life imprisonment, and has now been let off on remission? Is the person really capable of change? Is it ethical to do this? Is the person going to pose a higher risk to society per se? Because it could be a case that the person may have a mental disorder wherein a person is accustomed to killing. The person may be a serial killer, so to speak. So there is an ethical issue at that point, right? But the larger idea is, this becomes a very small paragraph in your larger discussions on criminal justice. Now, when are you going to study criminal justice? In polity or governance, mostly in polity. When you study the judiciary and then you study the lower judiciary, then you also study judicial reforms. A part of judicial reforms are criminal justice reforms, wherein we need to strengthen the prosecutor's office, we need to strengthen our investigation processes, we need to strengthen the capacities of the courts, we need to have institutions that protect the witnesses and evidences, the influence of technology, and of course your remission and the jail overcrowding problem. So this is where it all fits in. Will you get a dedicated 150 words or a 250 words or a 10 marker or a 12.5 marker on remission or on this particular issue in criminal justice? The answer is no. So how do you go about this? Take a separate sheet. On that sheet, put a heading, or if you can maintain a Excel sheet or a Notion template, nothing better than that. On top of that, write topics that need to be integrated into the main syllabus or into the core syllabus. In that, write India's remission reforms, the Bilkis remission issue, to be covered when I study judicial reforms. If you've already studied judicial reforms, add it to it. If you haven't, then wait for judicial reforms to be studied, to be taught to you, or if you're studying it on your own, and then integrate it. To just study this in isolation, when you have no idea about how the criminal justice system works, is unfair to you. So, when you study the criminal justice system, study the reforms of it, then study reforms related to remission. Otherwise, don't. It is going to unnecessarily give you a little bit of a scare. Now, apart from that, now you will see an article which says African cheetahs still in transit. Now, of course, this is important for both pre and the mains. If you read the article, you have to read the entire article. This is important, largely because cheetahs have been extinct in India for quite a few decades, I think since 1952. Now, we plan to reintroduce cheetah effectively by importing cheetahs from foreign countries. We're looking at Africa, we've been looking at Iran, and largely because the habitat in India would be conducive to cheetahs, and we're looking at introducing them in Madhya Pradesh, wherein of course at a specific by a wildlife sort of a wildlife park or a zone. Now, how is this important? How do you sort of take this up for your exam? Important. See, in the pre, you need to know about the cheetah. You need to know about the status of cheetah. You also need to know about the status of related animals, panther, leopards and tigers. We know that India has been very successful with the Project Tiger, wherein we have truly enhanced the capacities, the strength and the numbers of tigers in India. They're marvelous creatures, honestly. And apart from that, from the means point of view, this particular news has two pieces of relevance. One, increasing species diversity and protecting species diversity in an ecological habitat. And two, these are also tools of animal diplomacy. When you are importing or you are exporting animals officially between governments and the governments are facilitating it, that's largely to protect and embrace and enhance ecological habitats. So therefore, it becomes important for you to keep it as a quote for instruments of foreign policy. But that is pretty much it. Nothing else apart from this really needs to be done. This has been going on for quite some time. The reason it is in the news is because we were supposed to have the cheetahs by the 15th of August, but we have not been able to. There are certain delays. So that covers the front page. Apart from that, you will see news that says man has been lynched in Alwar on suspension of theft. These are criminal issues. You don't have to read them. They are not particularly important. Apart from that, in the left column, you will see a small piece of information which also gets repeated later on, is Talaq-e-Hasan is not so improper. First things first, this is not a judgment. The case is going on, and one of the remarks made by one of the judges while hearing the case has been quoted in the paper. This does not mean Talaq-e-Hasan has been declared unconstitutional. Its current status as being constitutional is fine. So what is Talaq-e-Hasan? It is essentially a way of divorce where over a 3-month period, a Muslim man can divorce his wife by saying the same once in over a three-month period. This is Talaq-e-Hasan. Talaq-e-Biddat, which is called triple talaq or instantaneous talaq, is basically saying talaq over a shorter period of time, which has been declared unconstitutional. There are of course other issues also which are severely affecting women's rights in Islam, and this also raises the larger questions of doctrine of essentiality and uniform civil code. How do you prepare this? On that page where you've written topics to be integrated into course syllabus, just write Talaq-e-Biddat dash religion rights dash triple talaq dash UCC dash freedom of religion. So whenever fundamental rights has been taught to you, Article 25 has been taught to you, whenever you are studying it on your own, just read about this. Now, how will this be asked in the exam? You will not be asked a direct question on this. At the most, you will be asked a question on the doctrine of essentiality, which is a specific practice essential to remain religious in that religion? Which is what was applied by the Supreme Court in the triple talaq, the talaq-e-biddat case. That if I take triple talaq out of Islam, does it make a person less Islamic? The answer, as per the Supreme Court, was no. Now, you may differ or you may not, that's up to you, but we abide by the judgment and the wisdom of the Supreme Court. So that is how you will prepare. Don't sit and spend hours on talaq-e-biddat and don't get into the history of Uniform Civil Code. There is a time and a place for everything. Apart from that, you will see two small news items on the left hand column, which says the Congress seeks fair probe into a Dalit boy's death. Don't bother about it, it's political in nature. Of course, it hints at atrocities against lower sections, but you have enough to theoretically study and to theoretically answer. You don't need a politically sensitive news. Then, of course, Delhi's Chief Minister Kejriwal offers Delhi's expertise to the centre in terms of helping the central government get better at administration and collaboration through sharing. Now, as noble and generous as this is this really important for the exam? No, because all that the Delhi government is doing is extending an olive branch and saying that let's work together on issues that we can work together on. You could use this as context in cooperative federalism at the most, which is a form wherein the center and the states work together or the states work together for a better, higher purpose, but nothing apart from that. So that's that from the first page. You really don't have to do anything else. Then we move to the second page. On the second page, as you would know, it's entirely advertisement based. So with the powers vested in you and me, let's just skip through the second page. Then we move to the third page. Again, we have advertisements. Then on the fourth page, you will see a very small article. We'll first do the important ones. A very small article towards the right hand side which says new lab to improve PDS efficiency. Now, if you've been studying for some time, you understand what public distribution systems are, how do they help in poverty alleviation, how do they help in food security, and so on and so forth. But why is this important? This is essentially an innovation or an initiative to have data-driven governance or to have some technical expertise to solving a social problem. What basically is that a public systems lab has been inaugurated at IIT Delhi, which will look at solving, which will look at scalable solutions to solving these problems, which of course impact countless number of people. Now, if you studied PDS, if you studied food security, just add this on your solutions paragraph or your solutions heading or your solutions points. If you haven't, add this to that page that says topics to be integrated in the core syllabus, which is just a data addition. That whenever you study PDS or food security or it's been taught to you, make sure that you add this as an initiative that we should look at participation to make sure that social problems are solved. Not only this, the fact that the government and an educational institution is collectively working to solve a social problem also could be used as a measure to strengthen higher educational institutions in India, wherein they should be used more proactively because they have the technical expertise, resource and support to solve problems that actually impact people. So that is the dual nature of this. Now, apart from this, on page number 4, you will see LG cautious caution as cases mount. Delhi, of course, has seen tremendous cases of COVID. I, for one, has been bearing the brunt of it, and this time the infection has been fairly severe, causing fairly a good amount of damage. Apart from that, woman daughter-in-law found murdered at home. Unfortunate as it is, it's a criminal incident. Don't worry too much about it. And there's of course something very interesting that Delhi is going to soon have its own food truck policy. You could use this as a government initiative to support entrepreneurship, but again, you could probably write it in a data set, but don't spend too much spend time on it. Doesn't fit in the syllabus at all. Towards the end of it, you will see an article which says FIR has been filed against this gentleman called Kataria. Now, this gentleman called Kataria, from what I could understand, pulled a stunt by trying to smoke a cigarette in an aircraft. Now, of course, it is prohibited and one should not do it. There is a reason behind it, safety, security and all of that. He also wanted to become famous by doing so. Now, these of course violate a certain set of laws, but are they important for the exam? Do you need to know the kind of laws that have been violated? No, not really. Could you use this as an example on the impact of social media? Yes. If you're writing an essay on is social media affecting humanity in general, this is good enough as a context on the lengths and breadths people are willing to go to. Then towards the end of the page, you will see an article which says the Delhi Commission for Women asks police to file an FIR over an assault video. Now, this is something which is not important for current affairs, but important for UPSC aspirants who are living in Delhi. This essentially is an issue wherein at a paying guest accommodation for women who are in Karol Bagh, who are essentially preparing for civil services, one of the security personnel or the administrative staff who was allegedly under the consumption of alcohol misbehaved with one of the women residents in the hostel or at the accommodation. So just be careful. Always reach out or call the police in case something like this happens. But I know this can be very fearing and heart-wrenching to begin with. So that's that. Now, on page number 5, gloriously you just have advertisements. You don't have to worry too much about it. Then on page number 6, see, as far as page number 6 is concerned, there is actually nothing that you really need as far as the services exam is concerned, and I'll tell you why. For example, Shiva Moga continues to reel under stress, which is essentially a local law and order problem. Parties lock horns over a communal row, which is again a law and order communal problem. You can use this as an example towards a larger answer on communalism, but you have enough major examples. You don't have to get into these specific ones. Then the Delhi High Court is asking the restaurateurs, people who own restaurants, is why do you want service charge when you can simply increase the prices of food? It's just a work in progress. Ignore it. A politician called Owaisi has condemned the release of Bilkis Bano case convents, which is nothing but the extension of it. The Kerala cabinet bill. The Kerala cabinet has cleared a bill to curtail the chancellor's power. This is essentially in the context of originally the chancellor the governor, who's also de facto the chancellor of a lot of state universities, has a certain amount of power to appoint vice chancellors, and the committee is a very selective one. So the Kerala government is doing is changing the composition of the committee, which allows for a representation of the states in choosing vice chancellors as far as the appointment of vice chancellors is concerned. Now, having said that, it is okay, sensitive federalism, competitive federalism, confrontational federalism, that's the better way to go about it. That this is largely an issue of the center and the states at loggerheads on a specific issue. But is it big enough for us to break our heads over it? Absolutely not. Then you will see Lal Bagh in a mess after the Independence Day flower show, which is of course what Indians are best at, the lack of civic sense. A student was gang raped by father's friends in Kerala, terrible, but again, it's a criminal incident, not particularly important for the civil services. Taunts by husband amount to cruelty. This is a High Court judgment that if you are taunting your wife, then you are committing cruelty on her. Is it relevant as far as the exam is concerned? No. But does it give you a better insight as to how we're becoming more sensitive and more understanding of the trauma that women face domestically? Yes. National anthem echoes across Telangana, not particularly important. A cancer survivor and his son complete the Ironman challenge. Now, this is, firstly, it explains to you what the Ironman challenge is. I, for one, will never be able to complete it in this lifetime for sure. Having said that, this is an incredible way to write an answer, write actually an essay on determinism, or write an essay on courage or bravery or doing the impossible or pushing or breaking stereotypes, or doing things that you ordinarily can't do. So that's an example. So what you could do is keep a separate page and write anecdotes for essays, and you can write this as an anecdote there. In a year's time, you'll have about 50-60 such anecdotes you can pick, and you can write a good anecdote to start your answer. On the left side, there is, of course, the Supreme Court rejecting a plea to shut the Lulu Mall in Kerala. Irrelevant, because whether the court shuts down a mall or not for environmental violations, it is alleged that it is in a high tide zone and therefore the mall should not exist. The Supreme Court has dismissed the plea, which means there is a general understanding that there isn't a problem to begin with. Otherwise, the court would have ordinarily looked into it. 8 accused in CPIM workers' murder held political and sensitive in nature. Special entry tickets in October will be released again. Not important. This is for a Doordarshan program, is not particularly important as far as the services is concerned. Now, on page number 7, again, I don't find anything particularly important as far as the news is concerned. Kejriwal offers Delhi's expertise in welfare schemes to the centre. Don't bother about it, we've already spoken. Delhi seeks the Enforcement Directorate stand on the bail plea by ex-Mumbai police chief. Again, political, administrative transgressions, not important. Working to improve Punjab's fiscal health, which is just a political statement. A man ordered to vacate home after wife complains of violent behavior. Again, an improvement or an evolution of domestic rights for women. A political statement made that Maharashtra is not doing, the current government in Maharashtra is not doing enough for the rehabilitation and improvement and emancipation of farmers. And of course, the ongoing water dispute, sort of in terms of the states of Chhattisgarh and Odisha, where despite a Central Water Commission or National Dam Safety Authority's advice, the data on water sharing or water release has not been shared by Odisha, of course, which seems to be a problem. Now, so because Chhattisgarh hasn't said the same or hasn't released data, it has further affected flood issues in Odisha, or Odisha for that matter. Now, this is where you might get a little worried that do I need to read the Dam Safety Bill, the Dam Safety Authority, the Central Water Commission. So in polity, when you study interstate disputes, water disputes is a specific topic where you study interstate water tribunals, you study water commissions, you study dam safety as a larger policy interface. So when you study that, you should understand what is happening in that context. You can add it to the topics to be integrated. It just becomes contextual in nature. Then we are finally on the editorial page. On the editorial page, stepping back from an ecological abyss is important because it explains to you why we need to balance growth with ecological sustainability. It is a fantastically written editorial. It not only gives you proper organization of headings and content, it also does give you a fair amount of data. So what you can do is you can pick up a little bit of data. For example, the data in the second paragraph says, according to Niti Aayog, 600 million in India face high to extreme water stress, with nearly 70% of the water being contaminated. Maintain a separate Notion template like I do. I will anyways do it. I will add this on data sets and I will use it next year in the mains exam. That's all that there is. Apart from this, read the editorial largely on environmental governance. So there are essentially two purposes of this. If there is an essay on balancing environment and growth or sustainability and development, and if there is a question on environmental governance, you can use these points. So if you haven't prepared environment or environmental governance yet, don't read the editorial. If you have added to the existing notes on environmental governance or environmental protection. This also has a lot of ethical interfaces as well, that how do you balance growth versus sustainability. Must read this editorial. Don't have to make notes around it, just keep the editorial, read it once, it's more than enough. Once environmental governance has been taught to you or you studied it, that's more than enough. Next, high points in science, technology and innovation. This is essentially an editorial lauding the efforts of the Council of Scientific and Industrial Research, which is popularly called CSIR. Does CSIR fit into your syllabus? No, it does not. Now, as great CSIR's contribution is, it doesn't really make a lot of difference. It does give you some examples about how Tata has collaborated with CSIR in their earlier days and helped set up institutions and mechanisms which truly impacted and made the lives of people better. But you will get enough such examples in the contemporary era as well. You don't really need to get into the whole CSIR game as such. Not particularly important, but yes, strengthening CSIR is one of the ways to increase India's commitment to improving our scientific temperament. So that is the larger issue that you should know. The other two editorials, remission without reform, which is essentially what we've already spoken of with respect to the Bilkis case, and secondly, taking responsibility, which is of course the Rushdie stabbing matter. You don't have to really get into this. Then on page number 9, you will see 3 editorials. Questioning a colonial legacy does not have to be done. It is state specific, and of course is an issue of police reforms wherein junior police officials, constabularies are made to work in domestic capacities at the houses or residences of senior police officials. Then there is something called a probe into the Nehruvian pledge. This is largely an editorial on equality, right? In terms of, are we truly equal? Where are we going wrong? Now, if you wait for a few months, within the next 7-8 months, you will get far better editorials on inequality. You will have inequality indices and therefore you will get better editorials. You don't need to really break your heads over this. Anyways, if you're preparing for the mains this year, you don't really need to. It's already been cut off. Now, the coming 75 years, this is an important editorial which talks about how India should spend a lot more time and how India should effectively focus a lot more towards building its R&D enterprise, towards investing in it. So this is important. Now, how is it important? In one of the sectors is in governance or policy in general is R&D, which means how should a country improve its efforts in strengthening research so that everything else improves. So research strengthening could be done by expenditures made by the government, willingness of the private sector, promoting research education, and there are several other factors. So this has to be done. A separate one-pager has to be done, because I don't think in most of the coachings or materials you will find a dedicated class on R&D policy of India. So keep this editorial as it is, because it is holistic in nature and covers how India should spend more on R&D. Make notes of it on India's R&D sector, and later if there are any follow-up editorials or articles, we can keep integrating it in this itself. So that's more than enough. Now, page number 10, understanding ethanol blending, is the only major editorial in the Hindu newspaper today. Now, what you should be doing here is, this is of course extremely important. We've already covered this and this. So, the Prime Minister had announced that India has achieved its target in advance in terms of ethanol blending, which is essentially blending ethanol in automobile fuel so that it becomes more compatible and more sustainable. So this is giving you a lot of technical explanations to this as to why we do it, how does this happen, what are its impacts, and are there going to be any problems around it, and so on and so forth. So could there be a dedicated question on ethanol blending in the mains? Yes. Could you get a question in the pre asking you what is meant by ethanol blending, and they'll give you a few options which might be confusing in nature? Yes. So this must be done, read and archived. Now, where does this fit in your larger syllabus? This fits in your larger syllabus in science and technology, or it also fits in on the larger issues of resources. So science and technology and resources, or renewable, non-renewable resources, largely non-renewable resources. So that's taken care of. The second article on page number 11, the literary trail of independence, does not have to be done at all. Please ignore it entirely. It is, though, an interesting read, but not important as far as the exam is concerned. Then on page number 12, which largely deals with a lot of national news, BJP chief meets party's Bihar core committee, political in nature, don't read it. Congress questions center over the revenue loss of 1.884 lakh crore. Okay, good, but not important to be read. The Chinese military vessel is an extension from the first page. FIFA is an extension from the first page. As I was telling you earlier, the Supreme Court to examine the validity of a child gang rape law, which has severe and difficult punishments. So once there is a judgment, we'll get into it. The BHP silent and the Vishwa Hindu Parishad condemns the attack on Salman Rushdie. Yes, is important from a non-civil services point of view. Don't bother about it. 31 ministers, again political in nature. A lot of this is just extension from what has been read already, apart from, of course, no targeted attacks on Christians, which is essentially with respect to certain communal roles, and will fulfill the needs of our partners, is essentially with respect to a Russian official telling you that the transfer of technology and other aircraft sort of deals that have gone through will be met with great enthusiasm. Irrelevant, don't bother reading it. So even if you just flip page number 12 entirely, it will not make any difference. Similarly, if you completely skip page number 13, now you would understand how does this work, except for defense equipment given to the army, wherein the army has been given better equipment for the soldier, an infantry soldier, communication devices and so on and so forth, and these are indigenously made, which is basically under the whole Atmanirbhar Bharat program and all of that. So this therefore becomes important and should be done. In the Indian Express there is a detailed explainer on this, which even if you do read the Hindu, you should always cross-refer the explainer once in a while. So that is that. Page number 14, as we could see, the whole Talaq-e-Hasan argument, call for a wider coverage, not particularly important. You can leave page number 14 entirely. Then you could move to page number 15, which is world, and this is where things become important for you to understand. You will see an article which says China sets sanctions on Taiwan figures. All right, doesn't particularly affect India. It is essentially the whole one China policy problem, where China says China and Taiwan are supposed to be one, and China is the real China, Taiwan is not the real China. Don't worry about it, irrelevant. Sabotage claimed for Crimea blast. While disheartening, doesn't have to be done, not important for IR, for UPSC. Why? Because it doesn't concern India. China unveils plans to boost birth rate, which is essentially where the National Health Authority of China is going to set up institutions and mechanisms to provide for healthcare services, where it's essentially saying there are two ways to look at it. One is to promote birth care, and the second is, of course, to stop abortions. So depending on how you read it, one newspaper will say China looks at stopping abortions, the other will say it looks at boosting birth rate. It's just a matter of perspective. Taliban to have more religion classes to universities, not really important for the civil services, but of course fundamentalism and the rise of it, you can contextually write it in your essays, but otherwise not really that important. And over a long period of the next 1 year, you're really not going to be using this effectively. China's missiles should be contested. Great, it's the whole defense issue between US and China, and the emancipation or the aggregation or the flourishing of missiles by China. Then of course US needs conflicts to retain global hegemony, says Putin. A war of words, irrelevant, don't bother. Kenya's Odinga vows to pursue legal options over defeat. This is, of course, with respect to electoral issues in Kenya, have no consequence to India whatsoever ordinarily. They do from a foreign policy point of view, but you will not be asked about this. You will not get a UPSC mains question that says analyze the political developments in Kenya and its impact, because Kenya is not in our neighborhood. Sri Lanka to end the state of emergency. All right. Again, it's again a development. Unless we do have re-establishment of normal status quo affairs, things are not going to be okay. The European Union is looking at Iran's new response to the final nuclear text. There are resumption of talks in figuring out nuclear disarmament in Iran, and of course the EU is involved. Not particularly affecting India directly, or for that matter abruptly. So wait for more developments. If there is something better that comes up, we'll look into it. Then page number 16, which is economy of business. July wholesale inflation slows down to 13.9%. If you're just starting out, you should know what wholesale inflation is. If you don't, wait for inflation to be studied or to be taught to you. You'll understand what is wholesale, retail, cost push, demand pull, other forms of inflation, the difference between inflation, stagflation, deflation, recession. You will study a lot of those things, you will understand it. And therefore the impact of it also. So don't worry about this particular statistical data. If you already know what wholesale inflation is, you will understand the impact of it, why does it happen and what does it lead to. Fuel demand increases, again transitionary in nature. Inflation is expected to stabilize by the end of September, says SBI's chief executive Khara, but again we'll see when it happens. Now China is looking to boost demand, speed up performance, recovery mode, all of that not really important. Most of the news in the business section today are in the private sphere. Most of them are about private developments. There is no major economic development to begin with, so you don't have to really worry too much about it. Page number 17, sports. The infographic sort of explains to you what does the ban mean and why is what is meant by third party interference, even if it's appointed, even if it's a court appointed set of administrators. So of course these are things that could be done in the larger FIFA sports regulation framework, but that is largely it as far as the Hindu newspaper today is concerned. Now from here, those of you who don't read the Hindu can now pick up your pens and papers. We will now be looking at the Indian Express. So if you notice, there really isn't a lot of difference between the Hindu and the Indian Express today. Now the Indian Express will start from page number 1. So on page number 1 you will see a lot of news that says a Kashmiri Pandit shot dead, which is unfortunate but not relevant for the exam. The pieces of information which are sort of important from the first page is as the ship docks in the Lanka port, Beijing says this is life, this is important. Now again the reasons remain the same, that you would be asked this as context in Indo-Sri Lanka or Indo-China relations, largely because India and US look at it from a surveillance or a suspicion point of view, while China says we are doing this to monitor scientific and marine research. Sri Lanka has allowed China to do so, largely because Sri Lanka owes China a lot of money and can't pay them back. So China is just being the big bully at the moment, which of course has a ripple effect on the whole string of pearls, ring of fire theory and regional peace and security as a whole. So that becomes important in that context. So whenever you study Indo-China or Indo-Sri Lanka, this can be added as a context. How does it affect Indo-Sri Lanka relations? Because Sri Lanka agreed, which India would be upset by, because India has been supporting Sri Lanka in many ways and means through their economic crisis. Why does it affect India and China? Because that it also adds to a trust deficit, given the fact that China is seen in and around the region while we want to have better relations with China. Towards the end of the first page, you will see sports turbulence, FIFA suspends AIFF, and of course a court panel for an Olympic body. Specifically, this is not particularly important. What has basically happened is, and I'm repeating again, is that the Supreme Court appointed a committee to take over football regulation from the All India Football Federation, which is an independent autonomous body. FIFA, which is the global regulator for football, the global governing body for football, says we are also independent and autonomous, and anybody else who isn't independent and autonomous violates the philosophy of football and football governance in the first place. On top of that, recently the Delhi High Court, if I remember correctly, has set up a 3-member committee which has taken over the functions of the Indian Olympic Association. So as far as the exams are concerned, especially the pre, you will not get any question on FIFA, AIFF, Indian Olympic Association. In the mains, you will get larger questions on sports policy. For example, the mains has already asked you a previous question on how sports persons should be rewarded. Should they be paid consistently from when they were children, or should they only be rewarded if they won a medal and come back, so that there is an incentive model to look into. So there could be a larger question of the problem of sports regulators in the country. Should we have a strictly government-owned enterprise, a private-owned enterprise, a mix of both, a flexi system of some kind? So if you wait for a few days, you will see editorials or articles on the problems of sports regulation in India. That should be enough to sail your boat. Towards the end of the first page, you will see Delhi Police in an RTI reply which was filed by the Internet Freedom Foundation, which is one of India's foremost organizations working for internet freedom and digital rights, wherein Delhi Police has accepted that they have used facial technology to solve crimes, and the facial technology that they've used has been accurate in 80% of the cases. Now, in an internal security law and order question, this is a way forward. Effective use of facial technology. From a privacy rights perspective, this is a complicated problem because you're not very sure as to how are you going through with data, are there inherent biases, the whole instrument of artificial intelligence ethics, and all of that comes into place. So when you study ethics, you will be taught artificial intelligence ethics or business ethics or technology ethics. This facial technology becomes a very strong case study to judge ethical behavior. When you study digital privacy, or when you study privacy in general under Article 21, you should study a paragraph or two on facial technology. India has been using it not only for crime purposes but otherwise also for vehicular reasons and so on and so forth. So if not, when you study privacy, then study facial technology and the problem there, but don't just study it independently without any background or a head or tail around it. So everything else on page number 1 therefore sort of becomes not very important. Unfortunately, 7 Indo-Tibetan border police personnel were dead and 30 were injured after the Amarnath duty bus falls into the riverbed, and we must take a moment today in our lives and remember that they died in the line of duty. So as far as the first page is concerned, apart from this, the Bilkis issue, which is essentially a larger issue about how remission works, about how the criminal justice system should be reformed, about how the center and the states collectively work on remission exercises. A larger question on criminal justice is important for the mains. One of it is investigation, evidence, witness, and of course crowding of jails. This is in the larger context of India agreeing to free people who've completed half of their sentences back into civic life. There's also an ethical issue. So in that context, the criminal justice system context, it becomes important. Otherwise, it really is not that particularly important. So that's that. And therefore, the first page of the Indian Express is sort of done. You don't need anything else. Then from here, when you look at from here we move to page number 8 directly. There are advertisements in the middle for quite some time, Gabon India partnerships and all of that. Page number 8 is an extension of the first page. We've covered that. Page number 9 is largely local, which also speaks about Kejriwal wanting to extend support to the government, to the central government on expertise in welfare matters, and of course Delhi's food truck policy, which really don't have to be done. You will see horrifying news about 4 youngsters dead in a car crash on NH48. road safety and all of that become important, but they will be largely done as a part of your syllabus on challenges of infrastructure and transport. Don't sit down and start revising road safety just because of this article. Page number 10 also largely remains irrelevant. There's really not much of importance per se. Several common news with respect to, say, Delhi PG security harassment problem and so on and so forth, but not particularly relevant as far as the exam is concerned. Even for that matter, page number 11 doesn't seem to be quite important. It just has some political developments on the side. Honestly, you could just move to page number 12, and on page number 12 you will see an editorial which needs to be done, which is called presumed guilty. Right now, there is something called condemn and listen, which is essentially in the context of free speech and hate, and how the systemic inequalities of power also accentuate problems of hate speech and sort of restrict freedom of speech. It's very exciting and a very interesting argument, but it is too nuanced for the civil services, so don't bother too much about it. Justice for Bill case also does not have to be really done. In choppy waters, again, the whole docking of China in Hambantota, you don't really have to, because it's just a matter of context. Again, the whole FIFA issue, wait for some time, you will see more sports regulatory articles. But the editorial which says presumed guilty, which is essentially about Supreme Court's judgments on a separate, they've requested for a separate bail law, they've asked for of restricted arrests and not indiscriminate arrests. They've also referred to a UK law, but they've also sort of contradicted themselves in subsequent judgments as well. So the larger bail issue, which is sort of hotly debated in the last few days or weeks in the papers, it's honestly not going to be asked as a dedicated question. The whole issue of the Supreme Court on bail would largely be a question in a larger issue of criminal justice. So don't sit and break your heads over knowing what bail laws are, what are bailable offences, non-bailable offences. If they're non-bailable, are they truly non-bailable? What bail is it? Is bail a right? Is an exception? Is a rule? Don't worry about all of this. If you are a law option student, perhaps you should know this, but that also in a very limited amount of knowledge. But for general studies, honestly, the whole bail issue is not really that important. Then on page number 13, you will see an article which says power reality check, which is essentially about reforming state electricity distribution companies. In the Notion checklist on the website itself, I have already updated, I've already sort of uploaded what is called a link from ORF from last year about a review of India's energy sector in the context of the national electricity policy. That should becomes your mainframe for the analysis of the power sector, and add this editorial to that, and you have a full editorial, a full analysis on the power sector. See, the point here is, I don't think anybody is going to teach you the power sector, so you'll have to sort of do it on your own. It's sort of self-taught, unless of course somebody in governance teaches you the power sector, or you study it from the internet somewhere, but no teacher as such is going to teach you India's power sector as a whole from inception. So therefore, just that editorial, just that article which I've put on Notion, and this is more than enough. It also sort of brings into more importance is because of the electricity bill, which has also raised some contentions. So read the editorial. Then you will know for the times to come if there are any other issues in the electricity on the power sector, then we will have some amount of understanding. Apart from that, a declining Muslim presence in public sector and in self-employment does not really have to be done. An editorial by a startup founder about how India is doing well again does not really have to be done. Then from here you could simply move to page number 18, which has the explained section, wherein you have the army equipment which has been given to the armed forces, which is FNSAS, Nippon and the LCA, which are essentially defense systems which make the army function better. Very important for the pre, and also helps you explain how India is embracing modern warfare systems. And then if you want to understand the context of the law on remission and all of those things, the Bilkis case remissions issue, the background remissions issue, you could, if you've already read criminal justice, you can read the editorial now, the explainer now. If you haven't, mark this to be read when you study criminal justice. Don't read remissions out of the blue. Keep a separate page which says topics that need to be aligned to the core syllabus, and you can add the remissions issue there, right? So that is that, and effectively you've covered the paper entirely, and you've covered both the papers today in that case, and that's all for today, right? So what you would have noticed is that over a period of time we'll start developing a lot of these discretions. Even the economy in the IR section in Indian Express today was completely irrelevant. Most of it was relevant from a generalist perspective, not from the UPSC, and also most of it was either private news or IR news that doesn't affect India. So the idea here is that you should be studying in a manner or preparing current affairs which is only derivative in nature, which only directly helps your civil services prep. All right, so that's that. Thank you. I'll see you tomorrow.